All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to all of our guests at today's educational webinar, Racism in the Water, Access for All in Outdoor Recreation. This webinar is co-sponsored by the Black Student Cultural Center and the Alliance for the Great Lakes. I'm Melissa Scanlon. I hold the Lined B. Eline Endowed Chair in Water Policy here at the School of Freshwater Sciences at UW-Milwaukee, and I direct the Center for Water Policy. Our center's mission is to connect the best research in water science, social science, and economics to inform policy that protects, restores, and conserves fresh water. And one way we do that is by mentoring postdoc water policy specialists each academic year to conduct research and share that through educational events like this one. Sarah Martinez was our very first inaugural water policy specialist from 2021 to 2022. She was a Wisconsin Sea Grant Water Science Policy Fellow, and we supported her research on today's topic. We have two moderators joining us, Crystal Davis and Derek Langston, who will be guiding us through the next hour. Crystal is the Vice President of Policy and Strategic Engagement at the Alliance for the Great Lakes, and Derek Langston is the Multicultural Student Success Coordinator at UW-Milwaukee and works as a success coach with the Black Student Cultural Center. And we have two UWM students who are joining us to react to the research. Brianna Ross is a first-year student majoring in communications, and Halea Fields is a fourth-year student majoring in English and has been serving as our communications intern for the past year and a half. So please post your questions. I'm sure many of you will have questions and comments. Please post them in the Q&A. Throughout the talk, and our speakers and moderators will do their best to respond in the last part of the webinar. So at this point, I am pleased to turn it over to Derek Langston.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Black Student Cultural Center. So just to let all those in attendance know, the Black Student Cultural Center is a resource center that provides different programs, events, and assistance to all students who walk through our doors, no matter how they identify. We do this in a number of different ways. We offer social events like the Multicultural Open House. We do game nights, movie nights. A lot of our students are really into anime, so we did a fantastic anime night event last month, and we partnered with the Southeast Asian American Student Center to do that. We help students with professional development opportunities, meaning that we help students find jobs. We prepare them for internships, whether that's writing resumes, cover letters, and personal statements, finding jobs on campus or within the Milwaukee community. We also connect students to various campus resources and alumni members, and we provide academic support services, which is my particular area of expertise. We pride ourselves on being able to meet students' needs, meeting them where they are, and working to provide holistic support. And that's just a few brief comments about our office. And what I'll do now is pass it over to Crystal.
All right. Thanks so much, Derek. Again, my name is Crystal Davis. I have the pleasure of working at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. We are a regional, traditional nonprofit environmental organization based in Chicago with about 7 offices throughout the Great Lakes states. I am based in Cleveland, Ohio. In addition to our stewardship programs, like our signature Adopt a Beach program, we mostly focus on water policy work. It mostly is fit into 3 buckets: our aquatic invasive species work, our agriculture and water work, and our drinking water work, which is most relevant to the topic that we're discussing today. I have the pleasure of introducing Sarah Martinez. We talked a little bit about her history with the center before, but Sarah was part of the first cohort of fellows at the UWM Center for Water Policy. She attended the University of Utah's S.J. Quinney College of Law, where she championed diversity efforts. With a diverse background and passion for environmental justice, she dedicated her career to pursuing creative solutions in environmental law. She hopes to embed her passion for environmental justice as an incoming honors attorney with the EPA Region 9 in San Francisco. And I'm happy to turn it over to Sarah now.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Crystal. So let me just take a second to share my screen and we can get started. Okay. Can someone give me a quick thumbs up to just make sure that it's up and going? Awesome. Thank you, Derek. So thank you so much again for that introduction. I'm really honored to be here today to share what I've learned with y'all. So let's go ahead and get started. So the inspiration for this article started when I was really young. Growing up, I did not come from wealth, and we invested in a state parks pass in Texas, and I'm originally from Houston. And every weekend we began making trips. And I noticed from a really young age that there were just not many people who looked like me, not many Black and brown people in state parks and national parks. And that's been an observation that was left unchanged as I grew up. And so my interest in the field of diversity and recreation started to grow. And so come to find out, my observation is actually supported by the academic research that I did. For instance, the National Park Service conducted a study over the course of 10 years between 2001 and 2011. They overlaid that data with census data from 2010 and discovered that visitors to national parks are overwhelmingly white at 95%. In fact, only 7% of visitors identified as Hispanic, and Black, African American, and Native Hawaiian, as well as other Pacific Islander respondents, comprised only 1% or less of visitors. So with that, I wanted to use this project as an opportunity to understand a couple of things. And just really quick to define the term, because I'm going to use it a lot, I refer to blue space. And blue space to me is defined as visible water bodies like beaches, oceans, rivers, water courses, and they also include pools. And so what I wanted to use this project as an opportunity to learn, to understand a couple of things. So I wanted to know what the academic literature said about disadvantaged communities' access to and the use of blue spaces. I also wanted to know what the literature said about systemic racism or economic inequality and how those two things intersect and present barriers to people of color and Black communities' access to or the use of blue spaces. So in my quest to research those questions, I wrote an article in my time as a water policy specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's Center for Water Policy. And with that, I wanted to bring attention to three things. First, the longstanding history of racially diverse communities' ties to blue spaces. Second, the intentional displacement of these communities away from those blue spaces. And three, the need for mindful investment into these areas to restore those benefits for disadvantaged communities. So first, I had to know if there were benefits associated with blue space. And expectedly, I found that there were several notable advantages that come with spending time near natural water sources. There's a special solitude, right, and calmness that comes with a simple walk amongst the trees or amongst the lakeshore, natural anti-anxiety treatment. The benefits of enjoying and engaging with nature are well documented, and I'm sure recently gained significant attention amongst the COVID-19 pandemic. These benefits include social and well-being benefits, economic benefits, and even environmental benefits. So first, in terms of social and well-being, blue spaces can provide opportunity for sports and in turn grow crucial characteristics like self-esteem and leadership. And there's even research to suggest that the more time one spends outdoors, it actually leads to more pro-environmental attitudes, hopefully creating the next generation of stewards of our natural resources. There's also lower prevalence of obesity and obesity-related diseases, lower prevalence of high blood pressure. It actually chills you out to be near the water. And well-being benefits like the alleviation of some mental illnesses like anxiety and depression. Economic benefits are huge, and I was really surprised by what the research had to say. So there's studies demonstrating that investment in green and blue infrastructure, like parks, river walks, especially beaches, are shown to yield huge financial returns. For instance, there was an $80 million investment to create the Detroit Riverwalk. That investment returned over $1 billion in its first 10 years, and provided improved public access to enjoy the scenic Detroit River with large paved paths for walking, biking, running, and just generally enjoying being outside. Investment in blue infrastructure and doing so sustainably can have huge environmental benefits as well. They have positive impacts on an ecosystem by increasing the landscape's resiliency and restoring natural ecosystem services. Some of these services include filtering water pollutants, slowing stormwater runoff, recharging groundwater, moderating floodwater, and reducing the impact of storms. So with the benefits, I wanted to understand the racialization of space, and I overlaid that with the racialization of space, excuse me, that we see in this country, and the history went back so much further than I initially thought. Most historical accounts of any water race nexus focused on the Black experience, and there was little academic research connecting water to other racially diverse groups. So my article, if you read it, focuses a lot on the Black experience. So with that, the racialization of space started in this country, as far as I understand, with slavery. So before the slave trade, many Africans grew up along rivers or in West Africa along the Atlantic Ocean, and they had so many positive experiences in blue spaces. And then as slave ships sailed them across the sea, the water became a key element in the shared traumatic experience of becoming a slave in the Americas. In slavery, those who became proficient swimmers were actually bought as slave tradespeople, sold for more, and they were purchased to run rivers for commercial purposes and completely altering their relationship with the water. Even post-slavery, after Union General Tecumseh restored land to freed slaves, President Andrew Johnson revoked the grant of land and instead opted to sell back the land to freed slaves. So freed slaves bought the land, tried to use them to cultivate crops, which was impossible in the wake of the war that left the land completely untenable. The second historical struggle I discovered in my research was the racist land use and housing policies. And one of the most recent and effective ways at creating struggle came at the hands of both federal and state governments. This was through the use of things like racially restrictive covenants, where white landowners began attaching covenants to deeds that stated buildings or property could not be rented, leased, or sold or occupied by any persons other than those of the Caucasian race. It came through the use of redlining, which was the practice of denying an otherwise creditworthy applicant a loan for a home in a certain neighborhood or area based on their race. It also came through the use of exclusionary zoning. This was by hiking property taxes, enacting ordinances that required minimum lot sizes of a couple acres. And both of these things would price out people of color and Black communities from living in certain areas. For example, in 1955, an all-Black church congregation used a straw buyer, a fake person, to purchase an estate in Darien, Connecticut, to use as a summer camp for inner city children. And when the town council learned of this purchase, they amended the local ordinance to say that land uses must be, quote unquote, harmonious with the orderly development of the district where the land is located. And ultimately, the town council deemed that the church's purchase of the estate was inharmonious, citing that their amendment had nothing to do with race and everything instead to do with the protection of homeowners, and voided the purchase. So it's just one example of how the racist use of land use and housing policies kept people out of spaces where they would otherwise be able to enjoy blue space amenities. There was also federal housing policy and real estate practices at the time that allowed where agents were unwilling to show real estate in white areas to racially diverse people to perpetuate the homogeneity of that space. For example, even the federal housing for public ownership recreational facilities to avoid the obligation to integrate the spaces, opting instead for encouraging private ownership to further perpetuate segregation. And private ownership would often require fees for entry, which again priced out people of color and Black communities. As another example, prolific Brooklyn Dodgers baseball star Jackie Robinson, he and his wife wanted to buy a home in Connecticut, and their real estate agent was unwilling to show them homes in predominantly white neighborhoods. So another, The end of slavery meant the era of legal segregation of beaches, pools, water fountains, that sort of thing. So in comes the Jim Crow era, right? Most states segregated pools, whether by law or ordinance, or even without any legal authority at all. For example, in 1931, the city of Pittsburgh opened a pool called the Highland Park Pool. It was a massive outdoor swimming pool and attracted thousands of visitors. But prior to entry, Black Americans were singled out and forced to produce a health certificate indicating that they were disease-free or they would be turned away. And this was a requirement that did not apply to white swimmers. Even when states finally provided and designated Black, quote unquote, Black pools, most states refused to provide any required upkeep and allowed these pools to fall into disrepair, making them too unsafe or unsanitary to visit, and instead encouraged the use of private fee-required pools, which effectively, again, priced out people of color and Black communities from visiting at all. So the historical struggle to access blue spaces did not exist just in an urban environment. We see that the research suggests that people of color and Black communities felt unsafe visiting public blue spaces like beaches and lakes for a perceived lack of safety. Examples of this include white supremacist gangs like the KKK patrolling beaches for people of color to ensure that no people of color were on the beach. Another horrifying example is the story of Eugene Williams in the 1919 Chicago riot. A Black 12-year-old boy unknowingly waded into quote unquote white water at a Lake Michigan beach outside of Chicago. White beachgoers viciously stoned him to death, and his death marked the beginning of the famous 1919 Chicago race riot, which was an extremely violent, week-long stint, resulting in the death of 23 Black Americans and left 1,000 people homeless. And the quote on the screen is just a quote that I found in my research that I thought portrayed the perceived fear that most people of color and Black communities experience when they go out into the outdoors. And I'll read it out loud just for a second. I wanted to sit outside and listen to the roar of the ocean, but I was afraid. I wanted to walk through the redwoods, but I was afraid. I wanted to glide in a kayak and feel the cool water splash in my face, but I was afraid. So after gaining an understanding of the historical struggle for access to blue space, I wanted to see what the literature said in terms of long-term effects of that struggle and how those effects act as barriers to access. The research demonstrated several barriers that may discourage people of color and Black communities from visiting blue space, including safety and discrimination, the impact of racist housing policies, proximity to blue space, and transportation and parking or the lack thereof. So first, echoing centuries of history chronicling racial violence and discrimination against people of color and Black communities that attempted to utilize blue space, many sources across the literature at least partially describe a perceived lack of safety as a barrier to accessing the outdoors. For example, in Miami, there's a study that showed safety-related barriers to beach access include intergenerational transmission of fear. So if your grandmother has a poor experience at a beach, she'll usually tell you that story, and you will also absorb that trauma and not want to visit a beach. There's limited opportunities to learn how to swim. So there's a safety concern for yourself if you were to visit a beach or a pool or any other type of blue space, as well as the presence of microaggressions and over-policing, which is usually what we see today. In terms of the lasting impact of racist land use and housing, as a result of gentrification and zoning, people of color are often left more susceptible to residing in more industrial areas with less investment, with people of color with fewer options for recreational access or blue space access. Not only that, but now people of color Black communities also have to contend with less green and blue space to diffuse heat in a warming world. And many residential areas comprised of people of color are susceptible to intense urban heat effects. Third, in terms of proximity, my research also showed that as a result of racist land use policies, proximity issues arise. For example, one study conducted in California showed that people of color usually live furthest away from blue space access points, mostly coasts. So 1.7% of Latin and Hispanics and only 1.5% of Black Americans lived within 1 kilometer of the coastline in California. And finally, looking at the lack of transportation and parking, being pushed further from the coast and other blue space, people of color are left with fewer options for transportation. because the research indicated there are so few public transportation options and routes to places like beaches. Additionally, many people of color and Black communities don't own vehicles, so there's no personal option to get to a blue space. And even if they could, there are often intense parking restrictions near blue spaces. So ultimately, I found that the exclusion of people of color from healthy outdoor blue spaces constitutes environmental racism and stems from mechanisms like exclusionary land use and housing policies, resulting in a diminished proximity to blue space, inaccessible and inequitable availability of transportation and parking, and the ongoing discrimination resulting in a perceived lack of safety for people of color. So next, I wanted to better understand what tools do we have that can help remedy some of these problems. And while I found a few, I learned that most are relatively ineffective at improving access, or they have yet to be applied to the beach access context as of today. And while I've listed out some of the tools I wrote about in my article, in the interest of time, I'm only going to be discussing a couple of them today. So to begin, there are several funding opportunities available through the Coastal Zone Management Act, which can be used to expand coastal blue space. The CZMA, as I'll refer to it, recognized that the nation's salt and freshwater coasts are valuable resources that require a balance between the wise use of land and water resources and development. The CZMA is an obvious choice to expand public access and redress historical environmental injustice against people of color and Black communities, because expanding beach access for recreational purposes is an explicit purpose noted in the CZMA when it was enacted. Second, the Civil Rights Act. It's probably what most people think about when it comes to the first line of defense against discrimination. And within the Civil Rights Act, there are two titles in my research that showed could help alleviate some of the barriers which people of color and Black communities suffer. One is Title VI, federal financial assistance, and the second is Title II, public accommodations. So first, looking at Title VI, Title VI tries to address institutional racism on a national scale. And it says if any person is discriminated against based on their race by a program or activity receiving federal financial assistance, then they have a cause of action against that discriminator. If the discrimination meets that definition, there are generally two standards of review. You have disparate impact and you have intentional discrimination. Disparate impact focuses more on the consequences of the discriminatory act, so the more of the effect. And intentional discrimination focuses obviously on the intent of the discriminator and is so much harder to prove. Unfortunately, a Supreme Court decision named Sandoval disallowed the use of disparate impact analysis and leaves only the intentional discrimination framework, which makes it so much harder for complainants to bring claims against state and federal discriminators. Looking at Title II, as it relates to this discussion, Title II entitles people to the full and equal enjoyment of accommodations of any place, regardless of race. And one definition of an accommodation is a place of entertainment. And furthermore, in 1969, the Supreme Court found that recreational areas, including beaches, are places of entertainment protected under Title II. So Title II could be a very narrow tool, but at the very least could help preserve public blue space access. Third, I wanted to talk about the public trust doctrine, an area of law near and dear to my heart, as Melissa Scanlon is one of the foremost scholars on that piece of law. Perhaps the most widely used and most successful legal tool to preserve and expand public access to beaches is the public trust doctrine. It's the body of law that directs the state to hold navigable waters in trust for shared use by the public. And generally speaking, those states whose public trust doctrines are extensive most recognize beach access as a recreational use that's protected under the doctrine. However, in general, its efficacy on a national scale is really limited because it varies so drastically by state. Okay, so moving on. Despite the limited tools that I found in my research to remedy some of these barriers to blue space access for people of color and Black communities, I believe that there is hope for the future. And I have three reasons why listed on your screen. First, I think there's a general overall growing recognition of the benefits of blue space and the importance of being outside generally, as well as the importance of the environmental justice movement. We see grants to plant trees in racially diverse residential areas to alleviate air pollution. You have grants to increase park and beach access. There's an increase in collegiate courses on the issue of environmental justice. We have huge supporters from major environmental organizations like Earth Justice and the NRDC, and recognition by the federal government. So I think overall, just as a general movement, recognition of environmental justice is growing, and that I think gives me hope. And with that, you see action on the federal level. For instance, the Environmental Justice for All Act was first introduced in 2021. And unfortunately, the first bill died in December 2022, but a second bill was introduced in 2023. And that's huge because a few of the notable features of that bill include two sections that do huge things for blue space access. So first, there's Section 11 of the Environmental Justice for All Act that specifically provides for the Secretary of the Interior to create a grant program for qualifying urban areas to acquire land and water for parks and other recreational purposes, to develop new or renovate existing outdoor recreation facilities, and develop projects that provide opportunities for outdoor education. There's also a second section, Section 12, that creates a transit to trails program. So to qualify, a community would have to demonstrate that they have, quote unquote, inadequate or insufficient or no park space at all, by demonstrating quality concerns or that the facilities that are there already don't serve the need of the community. But under this program, the Secretary of Transportation is charged with creating new grants to develop transportation routes and improving infrastructure for people of color to help alleviate transportation issues in reaching blue spaces. Another notable feature of the Environmental Justice for All Act, it actually reinstates the disparate impact analysis. It overturns the Sandoval decision, and it again permits private citizens to seek legal remedies against discrimination perpetuated by the state or federal government. The other thing that it does is requires the consideration of cumulative impacts when assessing permits under both Clean Water and Clean Air Acts, strengthens provisions under the National Environmental Policy Act, and requires federal agencies to provide early and meaningful involvement opportunities when proposing any action affecting an environmental justice community. And finally, it also provides $75 million in grants to support research, outreach, and development projects that address environmental justice and public health issues. And the third thing that really gives me hope is that in April 2023, President Biden signed Executive Order 14096, titled Revitalizing Our Nation's Commitment to Environmental Justice for All. And this executive order reinforces environmental justice as part of the Biden administration's environmental policy, and explicitly notes that in achieving environmental justice, it requires improving equitable access to parks, tree cover, playgrounds, sports, rivers, ponds, beaches, and lakes, and all of the benefits provided by nature, including America's public lands and waters. So overall, there's a growing understanding of the intersectionality of social, economic, and housing issues with environmental issues, none of which can be looked at in a vacuum. This recognition and the forthcoming academic and scientific research to support what we already know and experience gives me hope that we can create more inclusive tools and achieve more equitable access to recreation, and specifically blue space. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Derek.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah, for your research and your presentation in such very important and valuable work. So as Professor Scanlon mentioned, we have Brianna Ross and Halea Fields here with us today to provide some reflection and discussion on this research. Brianna is a first-year student majoring in communication here at UW-Milwaukee, and Halea is a fourth-year student majoring in English, who also works at the Center for Water Policy on social media and outreach. So to begin, let's hear from our student participants. What was one aspect of this presentation that you either agreed with or disagreed with, and why?
I can go ahead and get started. I definitely resonated with Sarah's experience. I spent a lot of time outside as well, and It was very interesting to go to national parks and find that a lot of other folks there looked different from me. What I really liked hearing from Sarah's presentation was just the long legacy of very calculated decisions that got us to the point we're at now. So it's, I've spent a lot of time observing the impacts of all of these acts and decisions that have barred POC from accessing green spaces and blue spaces. So I appreciated hearing the research that really lays out how we got here.
So Derek, did you have any initial questions that you wanted to start off with?
Yes, I do. So,
Okay.
so Sarah, you did an excellent job explaining the legislative measures that can be taken to preserve or expand access to blue spaces. But in your opinion, what can we do on a communal or individual level to aid in this preservation and expansion? This is something that I find to be very important, but I guess it's more of a general question, but I just want to know, like, what can I do as an individual, or we as like community or pockets of communities can do to aid in this expansion of blue space access?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of what I've read and just speaking from that perspective and from that place of education, I would say be a presence when you're out there. If you're in Milwaukee on the beach right there on Lake Michigan, be a presence for other people. And not only that, but try to get involved on a community, low key, local level. Try to get involved as much as you can. I was really privileged being a water policy specialist in a new city. I'd never been to Milwaukee before, and just really fell in love with the Great Lakes region. And I had, a wonderful mentor, Melissa Scanlon, to just hook me up and direct me in the direction of people who were doing that kind of work and were, working on things I was really interested in. And I just, I'm blessed to be doing that as my career. But if it's not your career, just taking that extra time to get involved and to know the issues and to make your voice heard. I think as people of color and as women, you naturally feel a little bit silenced. It's a little harder to stand out and speak up. But I encourage you to do so. You have permission to do so, and you should. I think that the only way things are going to change, right, and on a community local level, is if you're in those rooms and you're being heard and you're making your voice heard. So I think being a present and getting involved are the two best ways to start doing that at the local level.
I'll jump in with another question.
Sure.
You talked a lot about the laws associated that have kind of brought us to this point. What are the legal and ethical implications of water-related racism, and how can legislation be used to combat these issues? We have a lot of folks that are listening and paying attention, that are working in the advocacy space and really interested in what they should be saying to their state and local legislators.
Yeah, I think relying on some of the sociological research, right? You can say till you're blue in the face, oh, my water has lead in it, or my kid doesn't know how to swim, or there's stories of Black children trying to go into pools and having, white families shame them. That's all very real, and it's all indicated in the research. So I think just relying on research on the sociological, I think that resonates really well in those spaces, right? In those political spaces, rather than the anecdotal evidence. It's documented in real academic research. So I think relying on that can definitely help in those rooms and in those conversations.
Thank you. Do we want to check back in and see if Brianna's audio is working now? Okay, you guys.
If you have any questions or feelings you really want to be heard, feel free to put it in the chat, and we can read that out loud for you.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, so I have a another question that I could toss out that was in the here in the Q&A. So, Sarah, are there any updates on the implementation of President Biden's executive order that you
It
may
went
know
into
of?
effect April. It went into effect April. I can get the exact date. April 21st, 2023. Executive orders, really are just sort of an overarching policy, and I think it'll hopefully come through in the passage. Fingers crossed, of the EJAA this or next year. As far as I know, the Environmental Justice for All Act has not gone to a vote in either house. So we'll see how that plays out. But the executive order is out there. I think the Biden administration, did a good job of making sure that it was well known. Environmental justice is on the agenda. It's the goal. It's, here's what we want to do in terms of expanding blue space access and acknowledging the history that got us here. But that has been out since April 2023.
All right, great, thank you.
All right, and we're going to just add voice to Brianna's comment in the chat. She says, I totally agree with Sarah regarding the access to blue spaces. My childhood home was across the street from Rose Park, and my siblings and I had unlimited access to being outside. Working with troubled teen youth currently, the first time most of the girls were able to experience the beach was earlier this summer. A lot of resources and blue spaces are not accessible to certain communities and areas. I feel like having access to blue spaces definitely helps with mental health as well as physical health. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brianna, for your thoughts. I'd heard that and I'd seen it, but I didn't know if the research would support, some of those feelings that we've all had and those things that we experience when we're out and about in blue spaces, state parks, national parks. But it is supported by the research. So, should we turn to some of the Q&A?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. How would you suggest this history? Sorry, Lillian Holden wrote in, how would you suggest this history be educated to communities and youth that can lead to advocacy? Oh, I think that's a great question. I actually think I would like to turn that over to some of the panelists as well, especially those. I know two of you work with youth today. Did one of you want to expand on that, or I can just? So yeah, in terms of how I see communicating the history, right? I think we look at the Black experience as something completely separate from what we see in the environmental world. And my research and my feeling was that it wasn't separate, and the research supports that. And I think communicating that's a tough one. I think it's uncomfortable, right? To talk about the historical struggle. It's uncomfortable to face the fact that, slaves crossed the Atlantic, or that my ancestors crossed and drowned in the Rio Grande. It's an uncomfortable history, but without understanding that and without honoring that, you can't move forward in a meaningful way. And so I think in terms of having those conversations, I think it's just a matter of having the conversation and not beating around the bush. And in a lot of my professional conversations, we don't say those things. We don't say those things. But I'm very pro, say the thing. Just say it. Do it, do so respectfully, but you have to say the thing because it's true. So I think, and it's been seen all throughout history. So I think just bringing history into the professional setting can help a lot, and just being the door that allows the safety to have that conversation will propel us so much further than we've already been. So did we want to look at another question?
Sure. I love an opportunity to engage the students again. For the students, I so often hear when we talk about environmental justice and the challenges that we're facing, we hear that these are luxury issues, that, communities are dealing with, putting food on the table. So, folks not having access to, recreational waters to swim is a luxury issue that they just don't have the time to address. I'm learning more and more as I talk with youth and I work with young people in the Cleveland area that this is something that's at the forefront of their mind. And so can you speak to the general sentiment amongst your cohort and your colleagues and your classmates in terms of how you feel about these issues and your personal connection to these issues and what we talked about today?
I can talk a little bit about that. I think, early into learning more about environmental justice, it was kind of, I also kind of had an understanding, oh, this does seem a little bit like a luxury issue because that, we're kind of presented with other social justice issues that seem very pressing. And so green and blue spaces don't always take the forefront. But I think as I'm learning more about these environmental justice issues, we're seeing that it kind of permeates everything. When we're talking about water, like Sarah mentioned, there's lead pipes that, give people lead poisoning. And so that impacts, mental and physical health. And so I think as I started to learn more about just how much these like water related issues impact everything, I realized it is a pressing issue and it's kind of interconnected with everything. And so I think also, like Sarah was saying, there's kind of a growing and sustained interest in environmental justice. And so I think I've seen recently it's kind of changing some general attitudes about these matters. And so a lot more people are thinking of it as more pressing than I think some of us had been.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I, to be honest, I just really hadn't thought of it as a luxury issue just because it's been my chosen passion for so long, but that's actually absolutely right. And I think, I think what I tried to do in my article is, exactly what you said. Environmental justice is social justice, is housing justice, is economic justice, socioeconomic justice for people of color and Black communities. None can be looked at in a vacuum. And I think that's what makes it such a challenging problem today.
Thank you.
All right, so I have one question from the Q&A that I'll ask to you, to you, Sarah. So how can community members be a presence when it comes to issues like this if city leadership may not necessarily acknowledge these laws? And speaking to issues like this and other issues, I know that there's a bit of a dynamic that exists when we look at the different layers of how policy change happens, like whether that's, individuals or different stakeholders and reaching up to legislators who, make these decisions. So how do community members make their presence known so those who are making those decisions can actually hear them and enact policy change that's very impactful and necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can do it two ways, right? Getting involved, you can do it individually. You can have a letter writing campaign. You can show up and lobby for your own interests, or you can team up with, professional nonprofit organizations, like the Alliance for the Great Lakes, or I'm trying to think of another one in Milwaukee, but it's not coming to me.
Milwaukee Water Commons.
There you go. That's the one with Brenda Coley, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yes. Okay. It's been a minute, so forgive me. But I think, connecting with those organizations and being in rooms with, powerful, awesome Black women, people of color, Hispanic women who have the ear of people, of community leadership, of state leadership. I think that is really powerful. And I think knowing the issue is important, obviously. I think you can spout off all your feelings, but you have to understand who you're talking to and understand that there are so many pressing issues, right? Everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's got something that's bothering them. So you have to do a little bit of the homework before coming into those spaces and understand how each affects the other and have everything laid out before you come into those spaces. So I think it's extremely hard. It's not going to be solved overnight, right? Like, you can't help if somebody won't listen to you in a leadership position, especially when you're facing something really chronic, like a lead in your water issue, or you know, having faced discrimination at a beach or at a pool, trying to get into a pool. It's extremely emotional. It's really triggering. And so I just implore, you know, not responding from reactivity and being much more strategic in making your voice heard and getting those issues out to the forefront, for sure.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I see in the chat or in the Q&A, we have a lot of notes basically kind of reiterating the point that you've made, that this is so connected to environmental justice, economic justice, health justice, education justice. And so we can't talk about these things in a silo. And so I want to just, you know, lend voice to what so many of the viewers have mentioned in the chat there. There's also a request for you to share your resources and your sites. So maybe that can be done when we send something out after the webinar.
Sure. Yeah, the article is live on Berkeley's website. I also have a PDF version. I'm happy to send that out. And I do have a question that would like to be addressed. So it says, Sarah, could you speak more to the public trust doctrine and opportunities or ways for organizations to partner on EJ work and blue space access? Yeah, so the public trust doctrine, the only reason I said it was slightly ineffective is I was looking on a national scale, right? And the public trust doctrine is really state specific. And if you're in Wisconsin right now, recreation and beach access are included in your public trust doctrine. Between, Melissa could probably tell you better than I will, and she'll tell me if I'm wrong, between the mean high tide mark and the, oh gosh, it fails me, but there's a specific part of the beach that is protected for your use in the state of Wisconsin. And I think it is really beneficial if your state has codified or constitutionalized your public trust doctrine and the rights therein. But if you're in a state that hasn't, if you're, you know, in a Connecticut, you know, which is a place that has historically been very exclusive and very, frankly, racist in the way that they zone and plan their cities. It's extremely hard to use. So it just depends on where you are. So I think doing your research, you know, reaching out to your local organizations to talk about the public trust doctrine and how it can be used in your state is definitely something worth looking at, for sure. I was just looking on a national scale. So in that regard, it wasn't, you know, the best option. Let's see. I think there's another one. What research or indicators have been early signs of funding from the EJ for All Act that may trickle to county level government / support? Thinking for many understaffed and deferred maintenance of county park pools, splash pads. Oh, absolutely. So far, there has, at least, you know, in my research, I haven't seen any indicators of how that money will be distributed. And I think distribution is a whole other beast in and of itself, right? You know, I can be so excited that millions and millions of dollars are being thrown at the issue and they'll never get to the right spot. Distribution is a whole other beast in and of itself. So in terms of how the money, you know, the 75 million for grants on EJ projects will be distributed, that remains to be seen. But I think pressing the issue and I think asking the question in a space like this, kudos to Cassie Bauer. I think that's a huge thing that needs to continue to be pressed. You know, my article doesn't discuss a lot about that, but I think it is a huge issue and maybe warrants a follow-up article. Let's see.
Look at you making more work for yourself.
I know. Oh my gosh. My mom My mom was even like, are you going to write another article this year?
I
It was
love
so much work. It took me a year to, edit.
There was another question
Okay.
in the chat that we wanted to elevate from Sharif. Congrats on the excellent paper. There's difficulty on the national level with understanding and implementing environmental justice in federal and state work. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in the last question. So this work is really essential. On another note, the EPA will soon open environmental justice technical assistance centers. The EJ Tic Tacs is what everyone's calling them now.
no.
And so can you
Weird.
talk a little bit about how we could really leverage those opportunities and, create an awareness there, and a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's amazing. Also, hi, Sharif. For those who don't know, Sharif was the intern at the Center for Water Policy while I was a water policy specialist, and did aid in a little bit of the research on my article, which was published, and I gave him a little shout out. So hi, Sharif. I think that's awesome. I don't talk about this at all in the article, but it is true. With all of the newfound interest, money, policy initiatives dedicated to environmental justice, there will be technical assistance centers. I haven't done a ton of research into what sort of services they will offer, but there are new types of resources, right? You're just expecting old school money to come down, but the way that it's shaping up to look like is there's going to be separate centers which you can bring environmental justice issues to. There's also potentially going to be a separate environmental justice office for civil rights, which is the office that I work at within Health and Human Services right now, but it'll be a wholly separate office, I believe, within the EPA, or potentially maybe the Department of Justice, I'm unsure. But I think that, making these resources known, that's going to be huge in terms of, nonprofit sector, getting the word out, community engagement and outreach. That's where that becomes crucial to let people know what resources that they have. And I think with, in the wake of a lot of the sort of race-based upheaval in the country, I think knowing your rights and knowing the resources available has kind of trickled down into other movements as well. So I think making that well known amongst community members will be wholly important. And you said it, you took the words right out of my mouth, activist community group access will be essential. And so I think just getting the word out in the community is going to be hugely important. But also, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the Q&A and pass it back to Derek for some closing remarks.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Thank you again so much for your research in such a valuable topic. Thank you to everyone for attending. And what I'll do now, just be very, very, very briefly explain to anybody who's interested in getting more involved with the Black Student Cultural Center. You could be added to our email list if you aren't already. That way you can be informed on the events and opportunities that we have for everybody who's interested. Also, if you're ever on campus, you can just come through UWM on UWM's campus, Bolton Hall, room 170, just to get some information, just to connect with staff, other students, and to learn about the programs and events that we offer. We'd be more than happy to chat with you and show you around. And now I will hand it back over to Melissa.
All right, thank you. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. If you would like to get a recording of this to share with your friends and colleagues, just watch your email, because you will receive something from us with the recording. We'll also have it posted on our website. This was so fantastic to hear the culmination of Sarah's research after being in the center with her for a year and seeing all the effort that it took to put this together. It's just a wonderful celebration of her hard work to have you all attending this event today and engaging with her on this. And it's kind of like a big family reunion with her intern showing up and posing a comment at the end too. So that's been wonderful. If you want to learn more about the Center for Water Policy, please visit our website. We've got lots of resources there, including direct links to Sarah's research. where you can get free and open access to the article that she was discussing. You can follow us on social media as well. And there will be a short survey at the conclusion of the webinar, so please just take a moment to let us know what your experience was today. Thanks a lot for joining us, and thank you so much to all of our speakers.